Okay, so one thing that I have held all of my life has been an instant from when I was a child that pretty much defines me. So this is going to be a complicated one, but it did cause me to have to pay attention to the world, and I think that that's why I remember pretty much everything, and it forced me into having to pay attention and remember things and look, because when I was very young, very, 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 very young, okay, this is like the earliest memories of me. I was going to a place that was like, I was taken with my mum to a nursery where I had been weighed, and I was literally only just coming out of the nursery. That's the age that I was, and I started getting taken to this church thing that was across the road from the nursery by my real mother. And that's going to become apparent why I say that in a bit. And any time that I went there, I would not be able to remember beyond the Lord's Prayer that we all did in the morning. And then one day I was suddenly... This also, you might think, is where I start paying attention, but it's not. I was determined to figure out why I could never figure out what was going on in there. And, I was saying to one of the other kids that was there, do you know what we do here all day? What happens? And they didn't know either. So I was determined that day to actually stay awake and not fall asleep, because apparently I fell asleep. And then in the class, one of the teachers was like, "You're paying more attention than usual." What's going on? So, I was determined to stay awake and not fall asleep. And then that was the day that we were told the story of a third angel that was not Lucifer, because Lucifer got sent down to hell, and then the third angel was one that led a revolt against God, and his punishment was to be made human, but to live forever and to never be able to have God's love. So, God would never interfere, and he would just have to go through all the hardships without all of that. That's one thing that I remember, but that's not the reason. So, I was very, very, very young. I was still so young that I remember things. It's hard to put into words. Okay, so I had my own room in this house. There was a big house. They had just put up a fence gate. It used to be in the middle of the stairs, but I'm clumsy and I had fallen down part of the stairs. So they put the fence gates to the top of the stairs. That's how young I was, that there was a baby fence gate. I had only just started being potty trained, so I was using a potty. I was using it in the living room. I did not know what a toilet was. I did not know how to use a toilet. I'd never heard of a toilet. I was using one of those walker things that have the things that move about in it in the garden. I remember that. I remember that distinctly. I had a sister who had the same hair colour as me, dark black hair. She used to rollerblade on inline skates, and she used to try and encourage me to skate with her all the time. I could barely walk. barely walk. We went to the same supermarket every time we went out the house. It's the only place I had ever been other than that church thing and the nursery. We would go to that supermarket without fail, buy all of the shopping, and it would be full, the whole store, right to the end, and then we would go. On this occasion, I was looking at the ice creams. I was staring at the ice creams, and I was refusing to move until my parents would buy the ice creams. they walked off and left me, and then eventually I was like, I should try to catch up with them. It wasn't that long. You know, it doesn't take long for a little child that's barely above 1, maybe 2, to try to catch up with their parents. And because I could not walk very, very fast, I was waddling. I waddled to the next aisle, couldn't see my parents. I waddled to see if I could find them. I saw some people at the other end of the aisle, and I'm slowly waddling up to them to try to ask to see if they've seen my parents. What happens next is what I call kidnapping, because it is. And out of nowhere, I get grabbed by some woman, and obviously this is who ends up being my mum to raise me, drags me. I asked, where's the shopping? Because we had a trolley full of shopping. She's like, oh, we've already checked out and it's all in the boot. No chance. There was no time for her to have gone and checked out and put all of the stuff in the boot of the car in that time. Dragged me as quick as she could out of that shopping centre, as quick as she could out of the supermarket. Weird. And then, you know, I'm like, that's not my sister, because the girl that is now claiming to be my sister has blondie brownie hair, really, really nice. My sister had dark black hair, and yeah, not right at all. Not right at all. And again, back then, I wouldn't know the concept of time. We get dragged home. I don't think they even unloaded anything out of the boot, but the fact is that my family had an entire trolley full of shopping. This was halfway around the supermarket, and like I said, my family would go all the way through the entire supermarket without fail. We were only halfway through. Halfway. There's no way that they would have continued and finished the shopping and then checked out and then put it all in the boot. In that time, zero chance. This was not my family. This was not my family. I get taken back to this house, and the house is smaller, it's a different shape. I am suddenly sharing a room with my sister, which I was not doing. Was not sharing a room. Now I'm having to share a room in a much smaller house. It's one thing. I ask where the potty is, and then what becomes my dad is like, do you want to have to go back to nappies and use the toilet? I had no idea what a fucking toilet was or how to use it. I've never had to. This was not something that I did. Apparently I'm also at this age supposedly 7. Barely walking, still using potty training. They just put up a baby fence gate because that's how young I was. Weird. Very weird. That suddenly I'm supposed to be 7 and then having to use primary school in year 2. Suddenly I'm starting primary school in year 2. Out of nowhere. Also, the dad says, it's about time you thought about what you want to do as a career. I was such a baby. I don't know what the fuck anything is. I'm barely functioning, barely talking, cannot walk. And they're also like, why can't you suddenly walk anymore? Funny, because, you know, I couldn't walk. My mum's story is that apparently I ran off from them. I could not even waddle up to this fucking couple that I was trying to catch up to ask, you know, where's my family? I could not waddle up to them. I was waddling along trying to catch up to them. And I supposedly ran off? I don't think so. What I think happened is that They had a child that ran off. He probably saw that I was wearing similar clothes and looked similar or something. Ran off! Because I know how shit and god awful this family treated me for the rest of my life. Gave my sister everything she ever wanted and treated me like shit. And also my dad would sometimes say, oh, we found you in a bush. And then also you try to talk to him in the living room. It's like, what's that? Is that the wind? Just ignored me completely for several years of my life from that exact moment. So I think he knew that I was kidnapped. It's either their kid ran off and saw the opportunity to infiltrate and take my life, or because the amount of times that my mum tried to hold a knife, she jumped out with a knife right in front of me, like barely inches from my chest, and I had to react quick enough to stop to not get stabbed. Or she killed her kids and stole another. And I think she knew that I wasn't her child, because growing up as well, when I needed my birth certificate, my sister's, hers, and her partner's, and mine couldn't be found, and I had to wait several weeks to get my birth certificate. And while she was looking through all the paperwork, I also noticed that their blood type is a completely different one to mine. I saw in their paperwork that their blood type is a completely different one to mine. So I think they knew that I'm not their kids. I think they knew. But yeah, back to the thing. So yeah, suddenly there was no fence gate on the stairs anymore. The stairs weren't even an L shape. They just went straight up. So completely different set of stairs. The house was much smaller. The side room that me and my sister used to play in was not there anymore. Completely different situation. You know, suddenly I'm expected to be much older than I actually am. Obviously, now that I'm much older, it's not that much of a difference in age. You know, it's about 5 years. But still, it's a lot of my childhood that is suddenly gone and stolen, and I have to start paying attention to the world and looking to see where things were, because I was that young that I was not paying attention to the world. I was barely even looking at, like, A for Apple, B for whatever books. That's the stage of life that I was in, and suddenly I'm thrust into what's supposed to be a much older situation than I was actually. So yeah, it was all very odd and didn't make sense. And I waited. I wanted to go back to that supermarket and go and find a member of staff and, like, you know, did someone ever, you know, did someone report their child missing the other time? And literally, this was the only supermarket we went to. Never went back there. They never went back. They went to a completely different place. Never, ever returned to this supermarket, and it was the only supermarket that we were shopping. The only one. And she never took us back there. She also tried to show a video of something on the beach where she's like, oh, don't you remember this? No video footage of her child that's supposed to be me. There's one little bit where she pauses it, which is so far away that you can see two blurry figures on VHS tape, and that's supposed to be, don't you remember this? That's you. You can't see their faces, you can't see shit. There's no photos in the entire house of me, ever, before this. They have no photos of their child. So, you know, there's literally no evidence that that was me, and this is several years that I'm supposed to have been alive at this point. Like, you know, 7 years I'm supposed to have existed and not. It's very suspicious that they don't have any photos of their child up to that point. And then also, from there, first ever Christmas. First ever Christmas for me. And I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? And then my sister's like, you know what's going on. It's Mum dressed as Santa. Before Santa even comes in, that's my first ever Christmas. Never, ever get to experience the thought of Santa being Santa. Just completely ruined first ever experience. Yeah, that's my first ever Christmas. And then there's other things where, you know, none of my family really paid attention to me that much. My sister got everything she ever wanted, I never got anything. Constantly, even when my dad died, he claimed all of his inheritance, and that was like £15,000, and all that went to her, and she gave me about 1,000. Because clearly, you know, she knows as well, I reckon, that I'm not her family, and so she stole the whole money herself and tried to forge my signature and be a shithead. So that was fun and nice, wasn't it? And yeah, continue to just be excluded and be given shit. And anytime my sister did something horrible in high school, she was allowed out of the house. She was allowed to go do whatever the hell she wanted. And then she would often stay out late, and she would go on the internet and invite strangers while she was in high school who could drive to the house. And she would give out the address to these perverts, these older men, to come over to the house. And I would get punished. I lose privilege to play on the PlayStation. I get locked in a room with her for 24 hours to be able to do nothing. I get punished for her being shit. And I'm not allowed to have friends. I'm not allowed to go around people's houses. I'm not allowed to give out my phone number because of shit she does. And just the shittest, horrible punishments in the middle of the countryside where nothing exists and you can't do anything. And I'm not allowed to go out and see people. I'm not allowed to do things. I'm not allowed to date. I'm not allowed to, you know, even though there are lots and lots of girls in high school that I was getting on well with and I would have liked to ask you out. No, I'm not allowed to do shit. So, yeah. And it's not surprising that when I had the opportunity, I moved away. Because this was just a shit family and a shit upbringing. And they're not even my family. Like, I know that I did not run off. I know that I was just stood there looking at the ice cream in that supermarket because I wanted my family to buy the mint chocolate chip ice cream because I wanted the mint chocolate chip ice cream. And I was just standing staring at it hoping that they would pay attention. They would not have been able to finish the shopping. There's no chance. I know from experience from how long they had been doing that. Like, you know, several visits. We went there only ever that supermarket, and we would always do the full loop of the supermarket. Always. There's no way in that time that I stood there for like a minute that they finished the entire shopping, checked out and put it in the boot. No way. Not at all. And I was not 7. There's no way that I was still using a potty training and someone had put up a fence gate to protect me at that age. And I could barely walk. And then my parents took the piss out of me so much. They're like, oh, why did you suddenly stop being able to walk? That became such a fucking thing. And they don't get that it's because they stole someone else's child. I don't think they even fucking realise. They don't pay attention. The way they ignored me, I think they don't even know what their fucking child looked like. Honestly. I really don't think they knew. I think they just was like, there's a child that could be our child. Probably was wearing similar clothes. I don't know. But that was not... No. They stole a child that day, and I don't even know who the heck my parents are or where they even are. Also, knowing where I grew up yeah, no thanks. Like, my birth certificate, when I finally saw it when I was near the end of high school, it might have been after high school that I needed it for, like, ID and things. Yeah, that doesn't make sense, because that's halfway across the country where I was supposedly born, from where we were growing up. And I know for a fact that the nursery where I was weighed was in the same town, in the same countryside bit of where we were first growing up, which is way, way, way down south on the Welsh borders. So I know for a fact that I would have been born down there and not halfway up the country where I'm supposedly born. Where it's supposedly I was also 7 and I was not. I was like 1 or 2. I was barely toddling. I was struggling and learning to walk. I was just being potty trained, and suddenly I'm thrust into being a much older child and nothing making sense. You know, this was not my house. This was not where I knew. We never went back to the places that I knew. Ever. Ever. And without fail, I would always be taken to that church thing. I would always be going to that supermarket. It was the only supermarket we shopped at. It was a big old hypermarket with a giant car park. And we never went back there. Ever. Again. Ever. We went to some shitty Sainsbury's in a different place, which was not right. This was not anything that I knew. This just didn't make sense. And I kept my mouth shut about it. Because, you know, what can you do? What can you do? You just have to live with the situation you are. And that's why I had to start paying attention to the world. Because suddenly I had to. You know, I've been taken out of everything that I knew. And I never really looked at my parents, and so I didn't really know what they looked like. I didn't pay attention. I was a little baby. I was barely learning the world. I was not paying attention to faces and things. And now suddenly I've got a completely different family with that definitely didn't look. I can't remember what they would have looked like, my actual family that I had, but it certainly wasn't these people that dragged me out the supermarket. That's for a fact. And the fact that they have a completely different blood group. My sister, my dad, and my mum, completely different blood group. The fact that she kept their birth certificates all together, mine was not with theirs. She could not find mine. I think she had to reorder mine. So, yeah, no. That's why it took like a month or so to even get my birth certificate. It wasn't that she lost it. It's probably she got rid of it, which again, you know, is weird if you have such a thing.